period of time. So let's start with the first one. So tell us what you did on the economic front to allow for the emergence of this Silicon Valley-like miracle in Israel that's unfolded over the last, about 15 years, something like that?
20 years, yes, exactly 20 years.
20 years.
Well, the first thing I did was, if I can borrow a phrase from the Clintonites, never let a good crisis go to waste. We had a tremendous economic crisis when I took over as finance minister in 2003, horrible things. And the country was still along semi-socialist lines. And I decided, and most people thought it was because of the collapse of the dot-com markets, if you remember that, which it was, but it was a tiny factor of it. It wasn't a really important one. Or they thought it was because we had terrorist attacks, which was also part of it. But I thought it was a structural problem. Why were we, before the dot-com collapse, before this or that explosion of terrorism, why were we, a gifted people, people with a pretty good educational system, how come we were trailing all the countries of Western Europe? And the idea was, well, education is enough. If we have good education, we'll get well. That's hogwash. I mean, the Soviet Union had tremendous education, and they had tremendous mathematicians, tremendous physicists, tremendous metallurgists. They were dirt poor. And yet when any one of these people was put on a plane and someone managed to smuggle himself to Palo Alto, they were producing wealth within days because you had a free market there. So technology by itself doesn't produce wealth. Free markets and technology, free markets do produce wealth, but free markets with technology produce unbelievable spurts of growth and wealth. And that was my vision for Israel. I had this crisis now, and I said, in a crisis, I could do imponderable things. I could do things which were never accepted. So what I did was, I spent, first of all, I was told by my advisors, having been prime minister before, and now being a prime minister in Sharon's government, they said, who was in his 70s, they said, look, if you want to be prime minister again, whatever you do, don't take on the finance ministry because you'll have to cut budgets, you'll have to do horrible things, and you'll never be prime minister again. And I said, well, what do I want to be prime minister for? It's to push back the Iranian threat, including their quest for nuclear weapons, and to liberate the Israeli marketplace, so the Israeli economy. So if I achieve at least one of those goals, that's a pretty good thing. They said, okay, but remember, you'll never be prime minister again. This is 20 years ago, okay? I became finance minister, used the crisis. After 3 weeks of working 20-hour days, I put forward my vision to Israel, which answers your question. I said, I fell back on a vision because people were living, exactly as you say, in semi-socialist Israel. They were awash with false economics, basically saying, divide the pie, don't increase the pie, okay? That was basically what they all grew up with, and unless you get mugged by reality, it's very hard to change it. But we were being mugged by economic reality again and again and again, and we didn't change it. Now comes my opportunity. 3 weeks into my taking up the finance ministry, I give a press conference. And I fell back on my first day in the military, in basic training. It's a long line. The company's put in a long line on a big square, and the commander points to me, and he says, you, Netanyahu, look to your right. Put the man on your right on your shoulder. I did. He then looks at the next guy, puts the guy on his right, on his shoulder, and so on. Well, I had a pretty big guy on my shoulders because the commander blows the whistle. Barely took a few steps together. This is a race. It's called the elephant race. The guy at the bottom is the elephant. The guy at the top rides the elephant. The next guy was the smallest guy in the platoon in the company, and he had the biggest guy on his shoulder. He collapsed on the spot. The third guy was a big guy, and he had a relatively small guy, and he shot off like a rocket and took the race. And I said to the Israeli public, all national economies are pairs of a private sector, of a public sector sitting on the shoulders of a private sector. The private sector is the one that produces the wealth, or most of it, okay? The added value in the economy. And in our case, the public sector became too big and we were about to collapse. We were about to collapse like the guy next to me. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to put the fat man, this became known as the fat man, thin man example, and taxi cab drivers and comics spoke about it. It actually went into the Israeli psyche. If you ask people now in Israel, fat man, thin man, they know what I'm talking about. The fat man at the top, okay, we're going to put on a strict diet. Very hard to do politically. You're going to cut government budgets, okay? And the thin man at the bottom, we're going to put a lot of lungs, a lot of oxygen in his lungs. And what is oxygen? Well, many things. But number one, number two, and number three is low taxes, low taxes, low taxes, because that's why people risk, that's why they work. That's why, because they don't want to pay it to the fat man at the top. They want to have it themselves. And once we have that, we have to, the guy can race forward, right? Run forward and take the race compared to other economies. Well, not true, because as he begins to run, he hits a ditch, and then he hits a wall, and then he hits a fence. And these are called barriers to competition. We have to deregulate the excessive regulation that semi-socialist Israel had, and still has to some extent, but we've done a lot there. So it's three things: compress the fat man, lower taxes, and do other things to make business very attractive and easy, and remove barriers to competition. And frankly, that's what I did. I don't describe the 80 or so major reforms that we did, but I did them in a crisis. And the reason I could get away with it in a crisis is because, things are so bad, they were so bad that they let you do it. But I paid heavily, and I almost disappeared from politics. When I later ran for, as the leader of Likud, my party compressed to 10% of the Knesset. That's it. Right now, we're the biggest party. But I was merely destroyed. So my advisors who told me, don't take the finance ministry, weren't that wrong. I was declared dead. Having survived several brushes with death as a commando soldier, I now survived a brush with death politically. So I was eulogized. People said Netanyahu did great things in the economy, but he's dead. He's down to 12 seats out of 120 in our parliament. It's finished. Thank you for what you did. Go away. Okay? I recovered from that. And I was reelected.
So why did you pay the price? Like what?
Oh, why?
What was it about your reforms that made that price inevitable?
Because first of all, the most important part is that in order to put the fat man, the public sector, on a diet, I had to cut back Israel's lavish welfare system, which encouraged people to live on the dole and not to go out and work. Okay, so when I cut child allowances, which in Israel were extraordinary, they'd go up with each successive child. So, by the time you got to the sixth child, and you had, like the Bedouins in the Negev, they had 60 children from multiple wives. They could drive the BMW Jeep as their second car in the sands of the Negev. And this was leading to demographic and economic collapse, okay? And the same thing was happening in other sectors, the ultra-Orthodox community and so on. They didn't work, they just had a lot of children, which the others, the private sector had to pay for. And when you cut that, well, Jordan, I can tell you, you don't become very popular, okay? It's not cutting government.
Well, there's a lot of short-term pain there, eh? There's short-term immediate pain that's concrete for a lot of people when you cut. And if the benefits only kick in the medium to long term, then you have obviously a problem of emotion.
Well, I'd
the
like
cost
it
is
to
up front and the benefits later.
You're absolutely right, and you have to be prepared for that. That's what leaders do. If you want to lead, you have to have a purpose, and your purpose has to be beyond yourself, and you have to be ready to shed political blood, your own. You have to be ready. Otherwise, you can't lead. Otherwise, it's meaningless. You're always looking at the polls. You're always looking. Do you have a vision of what to do? I had a clear vision, and I wanted to make Israel a power among the nations. And the things, and I paid for it, and I nearly died politically. In fact, I was eulogized twice because you got to realize that I checked. Somebody showed me the statistics the other day. So I'm the longest serving prime minister of Israel, 15 years. And in a year, if I, as I anticipated, will form a government in a few days, in a year's time, I would be the longest serving leader of a democratic country in the last half century. But I'm already beating the odds in a different way, because a lot of people came back once from political death. That's happened. Winston Churchill is an example. Yitzhak Rabin of Israel, the late Yitzhak Rabin was another example, and you can find them in other places. Not that often, but you can find them. But the last time somebody came back twice, to do a comeback twice, was 75 years ago, 3/4 of a century ago. And the reason that's happened is because you're quite right. If you're able to survive political death, then people appreciate what it is you did for the country and for them. Even though, you could be swept by tremendous hostile press, as in the case in Israel, but you can overcome that. And in Israel's case, in my case, in the story of my life as I describe it, it was to bring into effect this vision of Israel, of a powerful state that has this tremendously creative economy, along with a powerful military, opening the door to peace with its neighbors, and also fighting